Hello, everyone, and welcome to the live show, the Unfound live show for August. What is today? The 26th of 2024. And yes, this is my voice. I'm thinking on Saturday, I did not do my voice any favors in some singing and other things that I was doing, really pushing my range probably a little bit. And this is what happened. So here we are. And I'm going to try to remember to keep my voice low. I've turned up the microphone a little bit. So you can continue to hear me at the same level. Of course, it might help if you turn up your speakers a bit as well. Given that I cannot be my usual bombastic self tonight. Kind of started, I woke up yesterday, and then for those of who are in the think tank, they heard my voice last night, and we struggled through that. And then today it is continuing through today. Actually, my voice seems to be about the same as yesterday. So I'm hoping that's a good sign. But as you all know, when you have laryngitis, the worst thing you can do is talk. But the show must go on. And so that's why I'm here. And especially, it doesn't help that what went on last night, of course, with the Oxygen Channel show, the girl on the milk carton. And I feel obligated to do this show tonight because that just came out yesterday. I guess you got to strike while the iron is hot. So I'm going to have to talk at about this level. Hopefully you can understand me. I want to assure all of you it does not hurt to talk. There's no pain involved. And otherwise, I feel fantastic. But the voice, I guess, like I said, took a little bit of a hammering on Saturday. I'm going to say probably this happened because as I've stated, I'm going over to Orlando later this week, and within walking distance of where I'm staying is a very big karaoke bar over there, and I was hoping to do a little performing over there. So probably was pushing it a little too much, testing what I can and cannot sing over there. And it cost me. I should just stick to what I know. And I've been doing real well. Of course, all of you who follow this live show know that my voice has been pretty good. It's been a long time since I came to this microphone with a hurt voice. And that's saying something, given that I practice singing like an hour and a half a day, 5 days a week. So, but it's been a while, maybe even since last year, maybe last summer, that I came and I was like, oh man, did I screw this up? And I screwed it up again. I'm hoping that it will come back, by Thursday or Friday, because I'm going to be over in Orlando from Thursday to Monday. So I got some time. If not, I guess I'll just have to hang out over there. But I had some plans regarding that. Maybe those aren't going to happen. So, but once again, it sounds a lot worse than it feels. And my voice is very resilient. And I think you all might know by now, a very powerful voice. And the times this has happened before, it doesn't take like a week or something to bring it back. It takes just days. I just have to watch it. but I still have a portion of Friday's update episode to record. So I'm going to have to get that done one way or another as well. But here we are on this August 26th of 2024. Good to see all of you. I have a fantastic show lined up tonight. I'm going to go forward with the idea that at least some of you got to watch the Oxygen show last night. It played and then it played as a rerun. And in fact, they are replaying it again tonight. And starting, I think, at 10 p.m. Eastern, maybe 10 Pacific as well. So maybe all of you, if you've missed it, you can set your DVRs right now for after listening and watching to this live show tonight. You can go right to watching that show. And keep in mind, it's in two parts. The first part is an hour long, and the second part is an hour and 15 minutes on. And to be really technical about it, I only appear in part 2. And I'm totally fine with that. And I'll get into some of that because what I'm going to be doing tonight is I'm going to go. I made some notes watching. I do the think tank, but I DVR'd it. And so when the think tank was done last night, I watched the replay and I actually took notes while watching the show. So I did hear some things that I had not heard before. And also, I want to give some insight into some of the points that were made, including what I had to say, even though I did not appear that much in the show, considering it was like 215 minutes long. But just some things I noticed that then you can take if you've not yet watched it, or if you're going to watch it again. You can use these notes and then compare them to the production. But I'll get to that in a moment. Let's see who is in here. Maybe before I do that, I want to remind everybody to give the show a thumbs up tonight. Even though I'm not at 100% voice-wise, I can assure you that the quality of the material will be 100%. And that's really what matters most. So give it a thumbs up. If you're new to Unfound, maybe you saw my name in the show last night and you're just finding out for the first time about Unfound and you found this live show, welcome to you. Whether here on YouTube or Facebook or on Twitter, or if you're listening to this as a podcast like August 27th or sometime after that, welcome to anybody who found out about Unfound through the Oxygen Network last night. Please subscribe. Please give what we do here a thumbs up. And if you're, like I said, if you're finding this podcast or channel for the first time, you have a lot to watch and you have a lot to listen to. So good luck with that. So let's go up here to the top. Nephew Charles gets in first. Karen, hello to you. Good to see you. There's my disclaimer about my voice tonight. Amy, good to see you. Lisa, look at you. Good to see you. Kathy, Stephanie. Yeah, you're going to be down Halloween week. That's fantastic. Charlie, we'll have to get together and do something. Go check about something Halloween-y or Halloween-ish over there in Orlando while you're here. That'll be fantastic. Hello, Hazel from New Zealand. And yeah, everybody, Dinky's is Hazel's dog. That's pretty cool. Sarah, good to see you. Greetings from New York. Good to see you, Sarah. Thanks for tuning in tonight. And Hazel says, I hope your voice will be back for karaoke. I hope so too, because I have some fantastic songs that I am desiring to sing that probably I could not even have attempted 6 months ago. So we'll see. But voice certainly has to be at least close to 100%. If not, I'll still go over there and see how everybody else does, because I really won't have much to do over there otherwise. So moving on, some things that trivia that went on with me this past week. First of all, last Wednesday, my team ended up winning, and we won by quite a bit. So we've won 2 of the last 3 weeks, which is nice. Still way back in the standings, but maybe we can get into the top 5 and play for the $100. We got 4 weeks to go. We'll see if we can cut the deficit. We'll probably have to continue to win to do that. But we won by like 20 some points, which in this game is like forever. So we were all happy about that. Teammate Scott knew the final question, and that was really, really good. You know how much I love to win. So that was the team trivia. And then on Saturday evening, I went over to a place called Sharks, which is where I won a week and a half ago by myself. If you remember, I was like not doing very well, and then I was the only person or team to get the final question. I ended up winning. The exact opposite thing happened on Saturday. Going to the final, once again, I was there by myself. There were about 15 teams there. Every other team has more than one person. I would say the average size of another team is like 3 or 4 people. I'm playing by myself, and I was winning going to the final question. How about that? Right? Pretty cool, huh? Right? And I did not know the final question. So I got passed up by quite a few teams. It's so weird to me that you can, you can answer like, I don't know. Let me think how many questions, like 20, 25 questions. And I'm out ahead. And then it comes down to one question and I don't know it. And all these other teams do. So I don't know. So they passed me up. I guess I was due. I guess that kind of luck bounces back, the karma or whatever else from the week before. So I guess, I was due for something like that to happen. That doesn't mean I feel good about it, but I knew that I just keeping track of everything. I knew that I was winning going to the final question. And when I saw it, I was like, I think I'm in trouble. I think. And I was surprised how many teams got the last question right. I had no idea. So, I guess just hit me in a place where, a blind spot in my trivia knowledge, I guess you could say. So, of course, I'll be there on Wednesday with my team over there at Finley's. But, of course, this coming weekend, I'll be over in Orlando for a disc golf tournament. And so I won't be able to go over to Sharks. Instead, like I said, I plan to go over there to Orlando and check out this karaoke bar. Like I said, that it's pretty popular. I'm reading about it, and it says they start at 9, and you sign up, of course, and it could be like 2 hours. They get so many people there to sing. You sign up, and it could be like 2 hours. You have to wait. So I guess I can try that. What are you going to do? But we'll just see how it goes. Maybe instead I'll seek out I'll go maybe there one night or 2 nights, and then maybe I'll seek out a trivia place over there or in Orlando, maybe one of the other nights or something. We'll just have to see, because I'm only playing 1 round a day, and I'm not driving back and forth. So I'm going to have some time on my hands. Of course, I'll have some Unfound work to do. We'll do the think tank on Sunday evening while I'm over there. So I'm going to have to find some things to do. And I am staying kind of like near like the really touristy area. And there are a lot of places to go within walking distance. So we'll see how that works out. I'll let you know next Monday, which will be Labor Day. And yes, there will be a show on Labor Day next Monday. I'll surely have gotten back in time from Orlando to do the live show next Monday night. So really that's what has been going on with me. That's really been about it since, of course, I had a long episode to prepare this past Friday, two-parter that went over 3 hours. And like I said, there's just a part of me that thinks that could end up being kind of a landmark episode when you cover one sure murder, one suspicious death, and 2 disappearances all in the same episode. It feels like something noteworthy, just like, something unusual, unique, and maybe just like when the Colonial Parkway episodes came out at the end of 2022, maybe something like that. So we'll see where it goes. And speaking of that, getting into the true crime section of the show tonight. Once again, I want to remind all of you to give the show a thumbs up. I realize that my voice does not deserve a thumbs up tonight, but when I ask you to give a thumbs up, it's on the quality of what I'm bringing to you on a weekly basis, not on how my voice sounds. So please remember that. So I did the going into the Gully episode, the Chris Gully who went missing from Chicago. That was Friday's episode. That was the main concentration, although we did talk about Joanna Wright. We talked about Ken Sean Ward. We talked about Shantae Bohannon, but Chris was of course, that was the concentration. And it was a very simple question. Who do you believe? In the discussion group, I posted a poll, very simple question. Who do you believe, Alan / Mookie, same guy, or Brandy? Because they've told totally different stories regarding that night. I don't see the way, at least the way this Chris's disappearance is understood almost 6 years later. I see no way to sync up those 2 stories. I don't think, it doesn't seem there's any way to reconcile them, that they're both telling the truth. Of course, both may be lying, but there's no way to reconcile it in a way in which both of them are telling the truth. So this was a simple question. Who do you believe? And it was a very, very tight poll in the discussion group. A lot tighter than I would have thought it would have been. 58% of the respondents say they believe Brandy. 42% of the respondents say they believe Mookie. Very surprised by that. Of course, that's what I'm looking for. When I do these polls, I am trying to create a question that will really make people think. And I'm looking for, I don't want every poll to always be 100% to 0. Then I'm not doing my job. I don't even want it to be 90 to 10. I can maybe live with 75% and 25% or something like that. But if I'm only putting polls in there, it's always 100% to 0, 100% to 0, then why bother? So this one, I actually thought it would be more like 75%, 25% in favor of Brandy. That it's just 58% to 42% surprised me. That's really, really close to 50%. That's just a couple votes either way. And that is interesting. Of course, she says she wasn't there. Alan eventually said she was. So in the think tank, and if you want to join the think tank, I'm actually going to be writing up a post here, maybe tomorrow or Wednesday, a big Patreon post on, at least on Facebook and other places, kind of resetting what we do there at Patreon, especially considering that Unfound is coming up on its 8th anniversary, not this Friday, but next Friday. So I'm going to be resetting that. I'm not changing any of the criteria or anything, but kind of a reintroduction to it to many of you. So be looking for that. But patreon.com/Unfound podcast And where I'm going with this is the think tank. The think tank is a part of the Patreon subscription if you are at the highest level. And in the think tank yesterday evening, it was 100% that Brandy is telling the truth. Nobody in the think tank, and I think we had 6 or 7 people in there last night. It's usually a small crowd. Nobody believed Mookie's. Nobody believed Alan's story at all. That Brandy was there. If you had to choose one, the think tank members decided that they're going to believe Brandy and saying she wasn't there. So, and of course, we got in deep into Chris's disappearance. We also talked about Ken Sean, Shantae, and Joanna as well, as much as we could. I think there's, like I said, I've had a short back and forth with someone in Joanna's family. They're not doing any media right now. And so I don't know any more about Joanna's disappearance than any of you do. It's just news reports, whatever has been written. I'm sure one of these days, and it's not if, but when, I'm hoping they come around, that we're going to find out a lot more about Joanna's disappearance, things that aren't written. So on the strength of all of that, though, I did write the blog, and I also decided that of the two, Brandy is the one that should be believed. And especially given the circumstances of which Alan came up with Brandy Jones's name. But as far as them all being connected, well, if you want to see what I think about that, you can go and sign up at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. And for only $2 a month, you can listen or read to what I've written there. Usually it's like getting another podcast, and it's only 17 or 18 minutes, something like that. So if you can fit Unfound a little bit more into your life, then just sign up at Patreon for $2 a month. You'll get the episodes free a day early. You'll get the episodes a day early. And then in addition, you get the weekly blog that I write almost every week. Certainly when we cover disappearances, I do them. I don't know if I'm going to do one this weekend for the update episode, but for the 8th anniversary episode, I'll surely write one. We'll get back on track there. So please consider it, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. So I just want to get a couple other things out of the way, and then I'm going to be going right into the Oxygen show, the girl on the milk carton, because like I said, I took extensive notes. I think you'll be able to follow along even if you haven't seen it yet. I will try to at least explain myself as, what was going on in that section, what somebody said, and my reaction to it. And I want to get to it because I don't know how long this is going to go. It might go for quite a while. And I want to make sure I get it all in. I don't want to put it off until like 10:30 tonight or something. But just some other things. Of course, getting toward the end of the month, you should expect a new Unfound now. I've already picked it out. Already have written some of my notes on it, and probably I will record that while I am over in Orlando. I'll take, of course, at least some of my recording stuff with me. I'll be able to do it over there. So please be looking for that on the YouTube channel. For all of you Patreon and YouTube supporters who hit the join button below, the next Found episode will also be coming out within the next week. Probably also record that while I'm also over in Orlando. Like I said, I'm only playing one round, and the round probably is only going to take like 2 hours or something. Like, these are not long courses. So, it'll be a situation like in its tea times. So my tea time, let's say my tea time on Saturday is like 11. I'll probably leave where I'm staying at 9:30, get there at 10, warm up, tee off at 11. I would expect to be done on any of those courses by like 1:30, and I could be back to my place by 2. So I'm going to have a lot of time on my hands to do Unfound work, do some recording and some things, work ahead on some things. I've been talking to a lot of people over the last couple of weeks, some disappearances that will surely come out in September. So I will surely get the Found episode done as well, but I've not yet picked out who the topic or what the topic will be for the next Found episode, where I look at a disappearance from disappearance to discovery. So I'll be looking for that, all of you Patreon $5 supporters and above, and all of the people who have joined here on YouTube. So that'll be getting done within the next week. Seems like I just did those. It's so crazy. And I also, this will be in the update episode, but I want to talk about it right now just for a moment. Given that I was on TV yesterday, and we're going to get into that, but you should be looking for former guest Kathy Turkanian on Netflix. She goes way back to, one of the first episodes of Unfound. It takes me back, where we talked about the disappearance of her biological daughter, Andrea Bowman. Well, of course, we now know that Andrea was found. Dennis Bowman went to jail. And Netflix is going to have a 2-part series called Into the Fire regarding all of that. And Kathy, and I'm guessing a lot of other people, make appearances in it. So if you have Netflix, be looking for that. I do not have Netflix now, so it's going to be a little difficult for me. So, but all of you, I want to tell you all about it. And so, be looking for that. Once again, it's a 2-part series called Into the Fire. I don't know why it's called that, but it's about the disappearance that, of course, we now know is a murder of Andrea Bowman, and how I guess it was all ended up getting solved after, many years. And I will continue to say this. The thing that still is something that sticks in my mind about all of this is that from the first time I ever spoke to Kathy, I remember it like it was yesterday. You meet Kathy, if you ever talk to Kathy, very memorable person, very memorable. And of course, very passionate, very direct is a word that I would use for Kathy Turkanian. I like her a lot. And from the first time I ever spoke to her, she was dead set on what had happened to Andrea, and she knew that Andrea was deceased and where Andrea would be found. And Kathy was exactly right. Now, it took like 3 years after the episode came out for all this to come to fruition and everything. And I'm glad it did. Of course, it took 30 years. But she was exactly right. And that's something that still continues to impress me so much. Such great insight into Andrea's disappearance, really understanding who Dennis Bowman really, really was, and understanding the situation and all of that. Just so good. I cannot, because as you know, I'm here to help. I'm here to help families, but a lot of families get caught up in the emotional side of it. They kind of maybe lose some objectivity. They go off on these tangents this way and that way. And I'm here to not only report on the disappearances, but sometimes get them back on track sometimes. But with Kathy, that was never an issue. Of course, I was just early on doing this, so I understand all this a lot more now. I'm much more experienced everything else. But there was no issues of getting off on any tangents with Kathy. She was exactly right from day one, the first day that I spoke to her. So I hope you'll check it out. Have to see if one of my friends who has Netflix will let me borrow their account for a little bit. We'll just have to see. We'll have to see. But I would like to watch it, and but be looking for that. I'm here to support all of the guests who go on shows like that, unless it's something like, the Dr. Phil show or something. Of course, I tell my guests, don't go on that show and some of these other ones. But if it's going to be a Netflix series or on the Oxygen Network, then I think it's well worth their time. So everybody, definitely Charlie, you and Charlie. All right. Charlie, I was thinking maybe October, maybe we go check out, Disney always, and I know it's expensive and I don't know what your mother's going to want to do and everything, but Disney always does a fantastic Halloween setup. And of course, Universal does. Maybe we can go check that out or something while you're down here. That would be fantastic. Hazel says, still well done for being ahead by yourself. That's a good effort. Yeah, I really, a trivia on Saturday night, really, I was really, I even missed a couple questions that probably I should have gotten if I'd thought about them longer. Maybe a little too quick on the trigger. But no, I can't complain about my overall performance. I was a little disappointed, but I know that's going to happen. But to answer all those questions by yourself and, still be well ahead at the end, it was, I love to win, but it was just one of those things. Just final question just happened to be in an area that I just am not that smart. And there's no way the people who run the trivia could have known that. That's just the way it went. It wasn't one of those ones where afterwards, like, oh man, I should have gotten it. What was I thinking? It was not like that at all. I was like, oh, what are you going to do? So Sarah says, Gully episode was great. Thank you very much. While looky here, Cherie. Cherie, good to see you tonight. Thanks for coming in, moderating a little bit tonight. So good to see you, Cherie. Wow, that thank you for showing up tonight. Of course, you should all know Cherie's a volunteer. She, if she can make it, she does. If she can't make it, that's fine too. I love having somebody to kind of oversee everything while I'm running the show, but she's not obligated to do this. Okay. So this is why every week when she is here, I thank her. She's not obligated to be here. She makes time in her life to be here. And I thank her so much. Good to see you, Cherie. Hello, Mary. How are you? DD, happy anniversary. Yeah, not quite yet, DD, but thank you. So David Coverdale has no competition. That's funny. David Coverdale's voice is shot, unfortunately. His voice is not going to come back. Unfortunately, he's really messed it up. Whereas I believe my voice will come back. Yeah, but yeah, to only be able to sound like David Coverdale did in his heyday. Oh my goodness. But he didn't take care of his voice. First of all, didn't have the greatest technique, first of all, and then didn't take care of his voice. And this is why the last time he went out on tour, he had to stop. Can't sing anymore. Shot. Hazel says, I think Mookie was involved in Chris's disappearance. He wasn't a good friend, and those types of friends are known to backstab. That is a very popular opinion, Hazel. I just watched Dennis's interrogation. So gross. So, okay, Cherie, very good. So Cherie, is that then that Netflix show? Is that what you're talking about? Or is that somewhere else? I don't know. I have to admit, I don't know. All right. And one more thing before I get to the show, the Oxygen show from last night. I hope you all got to, it's on YouTube. Oh, is it, Cherie? Maybe I knew that. I'm not sure if I knew that or not. Okay. So if anybody ever wants to see Dennis Bowman's interrogation, it's out there. Maybe some of you knew that. Maybe I did know that and forgot. I would certainly urge everybody to go check it out. The Consult, my interview, or is it my interview? I don't know what the proper English terminology is for that. I interviewed her. Is that her interview or my interview? I don't know. I appeared on the Consult last Tuesday or Wednesday. And Julia got to ask me any questions she wanted about me and the podcast and everything. And I was really pleased with how it came out. That is certainly in the last 8 years, even though I've, of course, have appeared on some other podcasts. I've, of course, with Dr. Telesco, we talk about my background, and, and of course I've interviewed Dr. T for an episode like in 2022, but surely that is the most complete interview somebody has done with me, where they're asking the questions and asking me my insights. And of course, it went for almost 3 hours. And I know some people got a little confused whether there's a part one, part two. I think that was a typo. Now, it did end up being 2 parts. But if early on, the data that came out was that last Tuesday, if early on Tuesday, if you got it in your podcast feed, like on Spotify, or you just went to their website or iTunes or wherever, it said part 1, but the whole thing played. So anybody who might have gotten to it early, like on Tuesday, maybe even into Wednesday, might have been like, oh, there's a part 2. Well, no, there wasn't. And eventually now, if you go look on your feed, there's a part 1 that's about, I guess, 2 hours. And then there's a part 2 that's the rest of the time, like 52 minutes or something, split up, something like that. So it was confusing to people. And some people even were writing in the discussion group where I can't wait. It was a fantastic interview. I can't wait for part 2. And I'm like, I don't think there's a part 2. I've listened to the whole thing. That was it. That part when I, the end of the interview is, when I at the end, I talk about just doing you. People who are going to be doing a YouTube channel or a podcast and everything. What I try to stress is you do you. Ask me about doing Unfound. I'm doing me. You do you. That's the end of the entire interview. So, so people were asking me, well, there's a part 2. And I'm like, I think that's it. Unless she was going to, I had no idea. It's her show. It's their show, I should say. They can do what they want. I was thinking, part 2, are they going to talk about what we talked about or something? No, it was just there was some uploading issue mistake, I think. It's all worked out now. And I'm sure a year from now, all of us will ever forget that happened. But originally when it got put out there, it said part 1. What actually, it was the whole thing. So if anybody was confused by that, I'm explaining it now. Ed, what about your neighbors with regard to your practice? Oh, my singing practice. Made, man, that is a fantastic memory you got there, Made. Good for you. Fantastic. I've not had any issues. First of all, you have to understand something. I don't always have neighbors. In fact, although I'm on a floor, there are 4 condos, including mine. So there's A, B, C, and then way on the end is D. So the elevator opens up. There's 4 condos on this floor. The people who were complaining were over here in what would be 8A, and they're rarely ever here. So there haven't been any complaints. And I do know how to check to see if they're there or not. And really, I kind of know they're there anyway, because when they go in and out of their condo, I hear the door shut and it's kind of loud. So when I hear that door shut, I know they're there. And when I don't hear the door shut, like on a daily basis, I know they're not there. And so they haven't been here for a while. So I have been practicing. I've been able to practice at night if that's what I choose to do, depending on my schedule. And of course, the way I am, it's not unusual for me to be doing whatever here at like 1 a.m. and maybe doing a little singing or something and not holding back. And so there haven't been any complaints, mainly because they haven't been here like for a while. They don't live over there. That is just some rental that they own, and they come down a couple times a year. So over here, though, to this side, there's nobody over there right now. And even when there was, I even asked those people, when I got that complaint, I actually asked the people who were staying over there, could they hear me? And I kind of got to know these people fairly well. They said we couldn't hear anything. So no complaints, but mainly the reason is because they're not over there in 8A. And there's been nobody over here in 8C, and I don't know if you're in 8C, you can hear me anyway. So I don't know. Although the people in 8D were gone for a while, I think they're back. So for like a month here, I think I've been on this floor all by myself. This is the kind of building it is. A lot of these people own these condos as like investments, and they rarely come down. Or if they do, it's like for a week, or they let somebody else come down and use it, something like that. They're not timeshares. These things, I don't think they're that. But I rent. I don't own this place, of course. Could never afford that. But a husband and wife who are doctors who live up in Ocala, which is where Dr. Telesco's moved to, by the way. They own this place. I've never met them though. And so I rent, but this building is only somewhat full during the winter. Like this time of year, you can tell by the cars in the parking lot, not a ton of people in this building. Whereas you come to this building in January, you're fighting for a parking place. Just, because of snowbirds and everything. So no complaints, I'm happy to say. But I will admit, when that woman complained, I did move my singing to the afternoon. And, but now that I know they're not here, although I have been practicing during the day as well, I've been doing a little singing and practicing at night too, because I know they're not over there. So there's Mate says, how amazing not to have constant neighbors. I got, Mate, it is, but I will be also honest with you. It can be a little creepy. Especially this time of year, probably when the building is the least populated of any time of the year. And riding the elevator, I can go days upon days upon days of riding the elevator and nobody else is in it. And going to get my mail, going down to the parking lot. There are days at a time where I don't see anybody. And so it's almost like, well, there's a guard out there. We have like a guardhouse out there with the arm and everything. But sometimes you almost feel like The Shining, when Jack Nicholson's wife, they go up to watch that building for the winter, and we know what happens there. Sometimes it's almost a little like that, especially if I go down to get my mail, like at 1 a.m. or something, it's dead. So it can get a little creepy at sometimes. I have to admit, there are times when I wished I lived in a busier area. Like if I actually went up and moved up actually into Clearwater Beach, I think I might like it a little more, just to maybe be out on the balcony, see the hustle and bustle, see more boats, and be able to walk down, onto the street, and there's like a convenience store or Starbucks or, a takeout Chinese place or something like that. I think I would like that. Where I am here, a little bit isolated, kind of quiet, isolated. When you look out to the beach, it's beautiful. Not a lot of boats, not a lot of people on the beach. I just prefer a little hustle and bustle. And I did have that down in Madeira Beach because I lived right on the street there. But of course, I would have gotten flooded out had I stayed there. So pluses and minuses made. Pluses and minuses. I live in the UK countryside, but the next door neighbor is constantly using tools. Hate that. Well, there's people using tools in this building right now, Made. And this building vibrates like crazy. I mean, it's a 20-floor building. I'm on the 8th floor. If they're doing work on the 20th floor, you can hear it here. So when it comes to recording the podcast, I got to pick my spots sometimes. Because if they're doing any pounding, anybody's getting a floor replaced, any drywall being done, anything like that, this whole building shakes. It's perfectly safe. It's just, there's something about it that the everything shakes, and you can hear it in recordings. I know you can. Not so many weddings on the beach uptown. Maybe you're right. Yeah, there hasn't been a wedding on the beach since like June. I don't know. I think somebody got ticked off about that. No, and it wasn't me. Yeah, not so aware of that. Yeah, made. All right. Let's get to Girl on the Milk Carton. What I'm going to do, like I said, I don't know how long this is going to take, but I think I owe it to all of you. I'm hoping all of you are going to watch it or already watched it. I know it's going to be playing in reruns. And I am going to go right starting at the beginning of part 1 and go through the end, just going over the notes that I took while watching it. And so you can kind of compare what I say if you want to, of course, listen to this or go back and listen to it as you're watching. You can do that. Overall, I thought it was very well done. I have no complaints about how I was presented, and we'll get to that. I thought it was high quality, looked great. I think that they got really good interviews with everybody, even though I didn't agree with some of the things that were said. We got to actually see pictures of what the house was with a lot of that was, I know they do reenactments, how I feel about reenactments because it can mislead people, but what are you going to do? It's not my production. But I like that you got to see like the house at the time and the footprints and how that all was and everything. I thought a lot of that was very interesting. Of course, they got some video of Steve being interviewed or testifying, although the way I remember it, I don't think that he testified in trial number 2. So I think that was all from trial number 1. I could be wrong about that. And you should know, given that came out last night and I had a lot of notes and a lot of questions, I sent Steve a letter today with a bunch of questions that came to my mind from the show. And I'll probably touch upon them as I go through this. All right, so let's get started. Mary says, very interesting. Went to New York City in July with my dad and son. We went to the Yankees game. Look at you, some other stuff, but it was too bustling for me. So much walking and traffic. I'm not a big New York City fan for other reasons, Mary. But if I could afford, maybe to live in downtown Tampa in one of those condo buildings or something like that, I think I would like that. Be able to just go down to the street. You got your little restaurants. You got, like a coffee shop. You got this, you got that, the culture and everything. I think I would like that. But you're out of shape, but I'm also used to small town Ohio life. All right, Mary. You're out of shape. She's not afraid to admit it. Okay, let's get into this. The Girl on the Milk Carton. This came out on August 25th on the Oxygen Network. This is the production in which I went out there to Greeley, Colorado, and got interviewed. And it was one of those things. They talked to me for almost 3 hours, and I was in the show for a total of maybe 2 minutes. That's the way it goes. So the first thing that I took a lot of notes. I'm only going to read the things when I went back through this that I highlighted. Okay, I took a lot of notes, but I'm just going to go over the things that when I went back through it again, the things that I think are the most important. The first thing that caught my eye, my ear that I did, and I'll tell you, if there's something that I heard that I did not know, I'm going to tell you. The first thing that I found out very early on in the first episode was that there actually was no plan of how Jonelle was supposed to get home that night. My perception, the way it was presented, is that the Matthews thought, well, she's going to be with these other kids. They're going to be singing. They're going to take a bus back to the school. And then somebody will drive Jonelle home. There wasn't a plan. It was not some set plan where Mr. Matthews, Mrs. Matthews said to Russ Ross, I'd really appreciate it if you could take our daughter home that night. That did not happen. It's I did not know that. Maybe somebody else knew that. I did not know that. I did not know that. So we have to remember that Russ Ross and his daughter took Jonelle home that night was not planned. That was just something that's just the way it worked out. Now, maybe it makes sense given that Russ Ross's daughter and Jonelle were friends. You don't know. I mean, Russ Ross and his daughter could have had plans to go somewhere after or something. But it just worked out that way. There was no set plan. Jonelle just happened to get driven home by Russ Ross and his daughter. I came out in I think the first 20 minutes of the first part. And I was like, man, I didn't know that. Next part that I have highlighted. Russ Ross continues to insist that the garage door was open. And Mr. Matthews in the episode says that shouldn't have been. That was very unusual. Although he didn't come right out and say it, he gives the impression that the family never left. When they would leave the house, nobody would ever leave the garage door open, which I guess makes all the sense in the world. I will tell you, like my brother and his wife, for some reason, they leave their garage door open when they're home. I would never do that, but they do that quite often. But they only do that when they're there. If they leave, of course, the garage door, if nobody's there, the garage door gets closed. But Mr. Matthews, to this day, of course, he was interviewed in late 2023, like I was, says that should not have been, meaning somehow that garage door was open. Could it be that Jonelle went up, opened the garage, or it couldn't even be that because once again, Russ Ross insists the garage door was open. It's called The Girl on the Milk Carton, Mary. So very important. So I guess what we're saying here is if by mistake, Mr. or Mrs. Matthews or somebody in the family, maybe it was the older sister, maybe it was Jonelle when she left the house earlier that day. I don't know. I have no idea. Given that the garage door was open and nobody was home, we have to be open to the idea that the killer was already there when Jonelle got home. I don't know what else. We have to be open to it. I'm not saying that's a fact. But being that still nobody in the Matthews family knows why the garage door was open, to me is a key piece of evidence. And it's never been resolved. Keep that in mind. So that was something, like I said, I knew about the garage door being open, but I didn't know what the real story was. You know, could Russ Ross get along? It was presented that way. And Mr. Matthews in the episode does not say, well, I think Russ got it wrong. He seems to go along with what Russ said. Very important. The next note that caught my eye, the next part, and like I said, they go over the pantyhose being on the couch and everything, but I want to go to this. And I didn't put down timestamps or any for these notes. These are just in order of how they appear. I did not put any timestamps of what time they appear in the episode, but it is in chronological order, all of this. What's interesting to me is that he must have missed it, but Jonelle's father at least did not say, and of course he is featured prominently in the two-part episode, didn't seem to notice the footprints outside when he got home. And remember what he said, he looked around. The question is, did he go back outside or anything? And he also did not notice that the footprints had been raked. Now, it very well may be because the garage door's open. Well, he just pulls right into the garage and it's dark and he goes into the house. I can see how he might have missed those prints, but you would wonder, I'm thinking maybe the father would go back outside and see if there are footprints of Jonelle walking away or something. It doesn't seem like he did that. So that is also something that's stuck in my mind. And of course, as you know, it comes out in the episode. I'll get to it. I'll get to it later. All right. So it says, father called friends, called Russ Ross. Russ Ross, it was a little confusing. At first, Russ Ross in the episode says he dropped Jonelle off at 8, but then later it's 8:30. I'm not sure if that matters. It could just be an editing thing. I don't know. But so they interviewed the first police officer on the scene, and I know I'm going to kill his last name, Blaskowitz. Blaskewicz, very Polish or something like that. And sir, if you're out there, I apologize if that's not how you pronounce your last name. I apologize. But Blaskowitz was the first on the scene. He is interviewed. I've never met him. Of course, I've met the other detectives. I met Cash. I think I met Prill, but I've not met this guy. And he said that the father was not very talkative. What Blaskowitz says that was notable to him: no sign of struggle, no forced entry. And it doesn't seem to me that, at least at first, even the officer who showed up, this Blaskowitz guy, noted the footprints in the snow around the house. I suppose he could have just been thinking, well, the father's been walking around outside or somebody. Doesn't seem like he noticed them to start. What also caught my eye or caught my ear was that they were able to eventually determine, once, I guess, the sister got home, and I guess the mother was out of town, as Kathy's saying in the chat. They were able to determine that all of Jonelle's shoes were there, including the shoes that she had worn to school that day and then to the concert that night. But it does sound to me like a pair of slippers, I guess those aren't shoes, were missing. I think that's the way I understood it as it was presented. Then it comes up with the marks in the snow, the backyard, of course, the rake. They did determine probably the rake that was in the garage is the one that was used. And see, this comes back. See, this is a thing that really sticks with me. The footprints are in the snow. Maybe they were there even before Jonelle got there. I'm certainly open to that. But what are the odds that the garage door would just happen to be open, that somebody could go in and get the rake to rake over the footprints? Because here's what I think I know. And by the way, my voice is starting to sound a lot better. Maybe it just needed worked out today. Whoever raked those footprints did so before abducting Jonelle. Why do I say that? Why do I say that? Because there wouldn't have been enough time. I mean, what's this person, whether it's Steve, Norris Drake, somebody else, unless there's more than one person, at what point were those footprints raked? Nobody, including the prosecution, ever has made a statement on that. And I went through this a while ago, trying to visualize the scenarios. And no matter what scenario you pick, what seems to be the easiest is that the person made the prints, then covered them up, and then abducted Jonelle. Well, then what are the odds then that the garage door just happened to be open, that this person would have access to a rake? I want you to think about that long and hard. So, but nobody, we're going to get to the rake stuff being raked. Of course, father couldn't explain it. They determined early on that it was a kidnapping. There were no witnesses, no cars. They only had like this dog barking at like 8:42 p.m., which certainly would have been after Jonelle got home and would have been there by herself. Now, here's something that I can, I realize a lot of people, since this all started in 2019, have come after me. Ed, you're crazy. Ed, you don't want to see this. Ed, this. Ed, that. Don't you see Steve Pankey did this? The very first cop on the scene still insists to this day, 35 years later, that somebody had to know that Jonelle would be home alone to do this. It's just not me talking. It was the first person on the scene. And of course, we know there's no way that Steve Pankey could have known that. No matter if the Nazarene church and everything else, there's no way Steve Pankey could have known that. Somebody else could have known that. No way Steve Pankey could have known that. Or, as the cop said, or it's somebody who knows a lot about the family. You mean like Norris Drake, who was right across the street? Something to think about. That's the cop talking, not me. And the sister verifies, and I know this has been a big question. Well, Steve, how could he know some of these things? Jonelle's very own sister says that the very next day, Jonelle's disappearance was all over the radio. All over the radio, all over everywhere. That's what she says. So Steve's story about how he found out is possible. He says he found out by the radio. Jonelle's sister verifies that, yeah, it was all over the radio. Once again, the cop, this Blaskowitz, who was the first guy who appeared on the scene, once again, he insists this was not random. He says it once again. When you watch it, you can hear it, see it for yourself. He once again says Blaskowitz, who was a Greeley police officer, first person on the scene, he's interviewed, insists this was not random. Now, what's interesting is something that I think is forgotten in all of this is, we have this snow. And we have all this talk about the snow prints around the house. What do we never hear about? We don't ever hear about any footprints concerning Jonelle. We don't have any footprints showing that somebody walked out to a car. We don't have any footprints showing that a person walked across some yards or anything like that. All we have are those prints of somebody, seemingly just one person, doing like a circle back and forth around the house, as if somebody was looking in the windows. But no footprints of Jonelle's were ever found in the snow outside. Certainly could mean she was carried. Certainly possible. It may be even probable. But I think we have to remember this, and there were no drag marks or anything. So seemingly, she was somehow being carried or something, but somehow this person was able to carry her and keep her from yelling at the same time. And we know she was not murdered at her house or in the snow or in the driveway or in the garage. She was shot somewhere else. So it means she was alive when somebody took her from that house, yet no screaming or anything was done, even though she was most likely carried. I want you to think about that. Now, it was in January of 85, when they finally went back and looked at their notes, that there was a guy who was they called Pastor Pankey. That's what they called him, who had come forward and said somebody had confessed about Jonelle's disappearance, and he wanted to claim pastoral privilege. You've heard of this before. Now, the way the police remember it, and it seems in the record somewhere, that eventually, days later, Panky himself called back and said, you know what? Disregard that. That's in the episode. That's not me talking. That's the show talking. You can see it for yourself. And at the time, in January of 1985, and once again, my voice is sounding a lot better. I'm liking this a lot. They dismissed Steve Panky's call. They dismissed Steve Panky as a prankster. I want you all to remember that. In the heat of the moment, in the early investigation, Steve came forward. I know his story. He was not a pastor and everything. But they dismissed him as a prankster, just somebody making stuff up. Remember that. That came out. That's what I highlighted. So now they interviewed Angela, and there was something that I found interesting is that of course, we all know Steve claims to be a big Christian. Angela said they didn't celebrate Christmas. They never celebrated Christmas. While the two were married, they never celebrated Christmas, despite Steve, I guess, and her too, going to Christian religious services. I realize there is some denominations of Christianity that don't like the commercialization of it. Maybe it has to do with that. I don't know. But just said, we don't celebrate Christmas, at least maybe in the traditional way that the rest of us think of it. They go through how they ended up going to California. She talks about the dogs, Steve somehow getting rid of their Great Danes. You should know, I sent him a letter today. That is a question I asked him. Well, Steve, what did you do with those dogs? That's one of the questions I asked him. We'll see if he wants to answer when he gets back to me, because I know he'll get back to me. Whether he answers the question or not, I have no idea. But he got rid of the dogs for some reason. So Angela says, I'm not here to I'm not saying I don't believe her, but there wasn't a lot of context to that. So I'm going to try to get some context. Trip didn't go well. They come back. As the very well-known story, on the way back, Steve hears about Jonelle Matthews, and then, and this is before he, of course, called Greeley Police Department, but he's going through, and Angela's saying, I'm just going through every channel, trying to find any news for Steve, who was driving. And this verifies, once again, what Jonelle's sister said, that it was all over the radio. Angela is verifying that. She was finding all sorts of news that Steve could listen to about the disappearance of Jonelle Matthews. Okay. Now here's, the Steve Ross, this Russ Ross stuff, to me, is some of the most controversial stuff in this two-part episode. I'm not disagreeing with the production. I'm not disagreeing with the people that, who interviewed me or anything else. They did a fine job. The only thing they left out was any mention of Norris Drake, who I'm sure came up. I know I mentioned Norris Drake when I was interviewed. They did not include it. It's like Norris Drake doesn't even exist, just so you know. But I would say the Russ Ross stuff, after I was done, was very different from the way I understand it. Because remember, I got to talk to Russ Ross. I got to talk to him in October of 2019 sometime. It was after I had already interviewed Steve, because Russ Ross name came up. I wanted to give Russ Ross an opportunity to say, and I did. And I also tried to contact the mayor of Greeley, who was a police officer at the time, and he just sent me back a very political answer, non-answer. So what Russ Ross told me in October of 2019 is different than the way his words, his relationship to Steve, and everything else are portrayed in the episodes. Very important to understand. And I'm going to go through this. But this was the first thing that popped up that caught my ear regarding Russ Ross. That was like a discrepancy in my mind. First, Kathy says Steve's dad, Dana Pankey, was a Baptist preacher. That's true. They get into that. That is mentioned. Right. But as Angela said, I'm not disagreeing. I know Angela and I have our differences now. I'm not here to argue with it. If she says they didn't celebrate Christmas, fine by me. I just caught my ear as, well, they were going to church and everything, but they don't celebrate Christmas. And maybe it's like I said. And she did say they were very poor and everything. Maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. Back to Russ Ross. In the episode, Russ Ross is portrayed as Steve's boss. I asked Russ about this back in 2019. He said he and Steve did not even work in the same department. Just so you know. In the episode, it is portrayed that he's boss. And once again, this is nothing against the production. It's not like the production is going to take this and then actually go check and see if Russ Ross is telling the truth or not. They're not going to do that. Not their fault. But what Russ Ross told me almost 5 years ago, because like I said, a lot of this, I didn't go back. But like I said, I've thought about this stuff so much over the last 5 years. It's etched in my mind. I don't even need to check my notes now, because I've had to think about it and I've been asked about it and everything else. Russ Ross said he was not Steve's boss. That is not what is portrayed in the episode. Just to keep in mind. All right. But that's, how that all came out. Of course, it comes out. Angela talks about how they came back from that trip and then all of a sudden one of their cars are on fire. That is another question that I sent to Steve. We'll see what he has to say about that. Now, I was surprised they did this, but they did it. Jonelle's father was the number one main suspect early on. I think we all know this by now, but that it was so prominent in this 2-part episode, the girl in the milk carton, was something. I give the production credit. I give Mr. Matthews credit that we're willing to talk about all that. Not easy to do, but it was in there. And in fact, they had a recording. They played a recording of, I don't know if it was this Blaskowitz cop or somebody else, telling Mr. Matthews, there's an awful lot pointing at you. This was an interrogation or an interview session that was done with Mr. Matthews back sometime in late 84, early 1985. Of course, they were lying, as police are allowed to do. They said there's an awful lot pointing at you, Mr. Matthews. Of course, that was not true, but that's included in there. Kind of surprised me, but it was in there. Now, keep in mind, I want you to think of, and I realize there's been turnover and people have retired. This is the same police department that we're supposed to trust now. This is the same police department that in 1984 into 1985 thought Mr. Matthews caused Jonelle's disappearance. And you know me. You know how much I suspect parents when it comes to their own kids' disappearances. You know how I am regarding this. Of course, we just covered Eliza Robertson. That's granted, it's not her parent, but the father of a friend who maybe makes the best suspect. You know how I am. Of course, the cops were crazy. Of course they were. They were pulling at straws and everything else. Do I really think they thought Mr. Matthews did this? No. But the thing is, this is going to become relevant later. So I want you to remember that. Early on, they thought Mr. Matthews was the best suspect. I want you to remember that. So in addition, it didn't help that the father failed a polygraph. And this is one more reason we rarely talk about polygraph tests on Unfound. And it's one of the reasons that when it does come up, I put no weight on any of them. And it is distressing to me that here in 2024, I still hear stories about police officers polygraphing people to get an idea of whether they're on the right track or not regarding an investigation. That is crap work. Crap. Because what happens? Then a father who is surely innocent gets wrapped up in this. Horrible that this is still done. I'm going to tell everybody out there, never take a polygraph. I don't care if you stole Twinkies from 7-Eleven. I don't care if you're a serial killer. Do not take polygraph tests. Don't do it. If you're an innocent person, it has nothing to do with a crime, even though you know you didn't do it, you don't know who did it, do not take a polygraph test ever. That's the only way this is going to stop. As long as people continue to volunteer or whatever, police are going to continue to try to use this machine that is not worth it. Don't do that. Once again, as you know, I'm for what works. I'm not for what doesn't work. Polygraph machines don't work. And Jonelle Matthews' murder shows it. I hope everybody watched that last night and made a mental note. Even if I know I'm innocent, they want to give me a polygraph test regarding something. The answer is no. Ever. Always. The answer is always no. And hello to you, Sharon. Good to see you tuning in from Australia. Good to see you. Next thing that caught my eye was this story from Angela. I'm not saying it's not true, but you should know that I did send Steve, I asked him this question in today's letter. Angela talks about how they were now in a new church because they got kicked out of the other one. And the pastor up there said Jonelle will come home safely. Steve stood up and pointed at the guy, yelled, false prophet, false prophet. Did it a couple times. They had to walk him out of the church. And of course, a lot of people have said, well, that's a sign that he did it. This is one of those things. I think the police have to decide who they think Steve Pankey is. They portray him as being very smart, very calculated, very cagey. They say that in it more than once. Detective Cash says that more than once in this production. Does this sound like somebody who's smart and calculating and cagey? A guy who would just stand up and says, Pastor, you're a liar about that. It really caught my eye. That happened. Once again, if you've seen it, the production already, you know that happened. If you have not watched it yet, you're going to hear about it. All right. And I thought what was a fantastic, Mr. Matthews, I know that we disagree. I know that you really think and your family think that Steve murdered your daughter. You know that I have my doubts, and I know we differ on that if the Matthews family is listening or ends up hearing this. But I want you to know we surely agree on one point, and I thought you made an excellent point in the production where you said that made the comment about how more money is spent on finding stolen cars than missing people. You are exactly right. That's the way it was in 1984, and that's the way it is in 2024, and it's horrible. All right, sir. So we can certainly disagree on a lot, but I want you to know, as a person who does this as my job and has been doing this for 8 years, I appreciate you just saying that so succinctly. It's still true, unfortunately. And I hope in the production, in the show, that caught everybody's attention. More money is spent trying to find stolen cars than missing children and missing people. Absolutely 100% true. Still true. Horrible. Mr. Matthews, thank you for saying that. Moving on. What's also interesting to me, it was a friend of the Matthews's that got President Reagan to talk about. She called the White House. She talks about this, friend talks about it. And what's interesting to me, they had all these tips come in as you would suspect and expect and predict. But even after that, the police still insisted that Mr. Matthews was still the best suspect. So even the president of the United States could not convince everybody that Mr. Matthews didn't do this. Okay. Next part, Angela went on to talk about the marriage, how it went bad fast. She has this padlock story about getting hit with one by Steve. And she talks about how Steve left her in a cabin for 5 days and he went off and did something. It was hard for me to tell, maybe I just missed it, where the time frame was on this. I do not think this was around Jonelle's murder. I think it was well before that, but she talks about that, how they went up to this cabin and Angela says she stayed there for 5 days by herself and Steve left, came back 5 days later with food and says, "Here, cook it for me." She goes, "That's how our marriage was." So there you go. So now that kind of, and then Steve also says, if you're thinking about, Angela has more stories about how Steve could be and how crazy he could be and threatening could be. That kind of finishes out part number 1. All right. That was in part number 1, which was an hour running time, but with commercials, it ends up being like 42 minutes. And Amy says that definitely stood out when Mr. Matthews said, okay. So now we go to part 2. All right. So that part 1 ends. Now into part 2, this is the part in which I appear. This is something I didn't know. And it's something that probably should not have been allowed. I have to admit, maybe some of you knew this. I did not know this. Did you know that Detective Cash and Jonelle's older sister, Jennifer, were in the same exact class in school in Greeley? How many of you knew that? I did not know that. And I got to ask, how was this allowed to happen? Is there not a kind of bias going on here, maybe? I have no reason to think that Detective Cash did anything underhanded. All right, I'm going to state that for the record. But is that really, and I realize Greeley's a small, but it's not that small. I think that they said Greeley has 70 to 80 police officers. Did Detective Cash really have to work on this? Is that not maybe hitting a little too close to home? I wonder. I did not know that. Okay. Once again, I'm not saying he did anything, but I always thought you tried to do things to make sure that investigations are not biased in any way. Even if we think that the investigator would never do that, you never want to put that person in that position. But it seems that nobody minded that. And I don't think that was even called into question either trial. I realize I'm not saying Detective Cash did anything wrong, but, a defense attorney is going to, try to do anything he or she can. I don't think that came up at either trial. I did not know that. All right. I'm wondering if any of you knew that. Detective Cash and Jonelle's older sister went to school together. I looked at pictures. I don't know if it's necessarily high school, but like junior high school. And then I'm going to have to take for granted that they graduated together. They knew each other going to school together. I don't understand how that happened. Okay, moving on. Detective Cash said failure was not an option. I hate hearing that. I realize that's a great attitude for winning a war or something. But when it comes to stuff like this, often these things are failures. And then I start to wonder, well, what does that mean? What lengths is somebody going to make sure it's not a failure? Because we know a lot of these investigations are failures, and these investigations are done by really, really good people. Something to think about. So then in the 90s, it seems that the Pankeys had some money issues, and Angela stated that it was because, Steve claimed it was because police were persecuting him. As you would imagine, in my letter to Steve today, I asked him about that. Angela said the rent wasn't getting paid and all these things. Very well may true. I don't remember knowing about that or not. I really don't. Maybe I did. Maybe it's even in the interview with Steve. I don't remember. But he claimed, that Steve was claiming, according to Angela, that the reason the rent wasn't getting paid is because he was blowing all this money on attorney's fees because the police were coming after him. It wasn't the Greeley Police Department. I don't know what police department he's talking about or what this is for or what. That's what he was saying. It very well may be that Steve's making it all up. That's why I asked him. Now, remember, I think this was now not Detective Cash, but I think this was Detective Prill, one of the more, the modern times guys from like 2015 or whatever and on. He states in part 2, and I want you to remember this. I told you to remember something before about the Blaskowitz, the original cop, and all of this. I think it was Detective Prill in the show says when they started reopening this file on Jonelle Matthews, they said that the original investigation had been a mess. Ganja, all right, Ganja Lover. Love your podcast. This is my first time catching live. Well, thank you, Ganja Lover 38. Just to be honest, I'm not a ganja lover, but if you want to be a ganja lover, I guess I'm okay with that. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Remember that the detectives, when they started reopening Jonelle Matthews' disappearance file, the cold case file, they said that the initial investigation was a mess. In some ways, I agree with them. That they thought that Mr. Matthews had anything to do with his daughter's disappearance was crazy. The problem is that they used a lot of that original investigation material to prosecute Steve both times. Remember that. They're saying it's a mess. They used it anyway. Come back to that. Said it was a complete mess. Whatever went down in 1985 was a mess. Yeah, I agree. So they found, and so this is something that I did not know. We're coming up on something that, once again, something. If you're welcome, Ganja Lover 38. We're coming up on another thing that I did not know, and that was that in that report. Remember, Steve called in that same report. They had written down in January of 1985 that Jonelle was probably dead and that he said the local Nazarene church could be involved. Steve also mentioned Russ Ross. But this is not unusual because they admitted in the radio reports back at the time that Russ Ross's name was already out there. So they tried to portray it as Steve knew something secret. Oh, it's protected information that Russ Ross dropped Jonelle off. No, Russ Ross's name was in the radio reports back then. Keep that in mind. And the police admitted they could not eliminate Russ Ross. And so we now are up to April of 2019. And this is how Steve became a suspect. If at least the way it was portrayed in the show, it is clear to me that Steve Pankey was never considered a person of interest in Jonelle's disappearance until April of 2019. 30 years. And remember, despite him calling in back then and allegedly popping in every once in a while and being on police radar and they calling him a prankster and everything, not once did the Greeley Police Department ever mention to the Matthews about Steve Pankey. You know, there's this guy that keeps coming around. His name's Steve Pankey. Have you ever heard of him? Never asked them. They had never heard of him until Jonelle's remains were found. Seems strange to me. But this is how Steve became a main suspect. If you can believe, this is once again something that I did not know. What happened was they started going through the file. They came across Steve's original report from January of 85 mentioning Russ Ross. They went to talk to Russ Ross. I guess didn't do that convincing of an interview. So they decided, you know what? Let's track down the guy that originally made this report and see what he has to say. Why did he think that Russ Ross could be involved? What was when they went to talk to Steve and he didn't want to talk to them. And he started talking about immunity and, all the things, the Steve spiel by now. It was at that point that they started to suspect him. Do you see the irony of that? They went to Steve wanting to talk to him about Russ Ross because they suspected Russ. Steve acted weird for about 20 minutes. They come away thinking Steve did it. And yes, I told Steve this in the letter today. I did. That is how Steve Pankey ended up being suspect number one. I guess what we're saying here is if that had showed up, Steve would have just said, yeah, I made that report. Yeah, I still think he did it. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you. I have nothing to hide. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I did say that. I did call that in. Yeah, I was kind of a pastor at the time, but I was really nervous about calling. If he had given him some speech like that, Prill and Cash would have left that day, never suspected Steve at all. That Steve acted the way Steve acts is what caused him to be suspect number one. If you watch that show and you think something different that please let me know. Put it in the comments section. Email me, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. But that was my impression of it. I never knew that. They went to Steve to ask about Russ Ross. They come away thinking, oh, wait, I think Steve did it. Why did Steve Pankey think that Russ Ross was involved? Well, Russ Ross did drop Jonelle off, and that was news back then. And Steve and Russ had worked kind of together at one time, and they hated each other. That's why, Hazel. Steve said he didn't want to talk to him in April of 2019. Remember, this is before Jonelle's remains were found. Steve did not want to talk to them over the phone. I won't say anything until I have a deal that can't be broken. He's paranoid. Steve is paranoid. And you also kind of keep something. Steve is not stupid. He may not know how to spell words. He makes a lot of misspellings in the words that he writes me. But he is not stupid. There is no way Steve really, 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 really could have believed that he was going to, if he killed Jonelle, that if he was given immunity, that he would get off of killing Jonelle. There's no way he could believe that. He would know that. He would know there's no way they could give him immunity. So you tell me why he was asking for it. Why? He knows. I mean, Steve, a lot of things, not stupid. He would know that no deal would be good. Keep that in mind. I got to remember, Steve Pankey knows that a person cannot get immunity, then testify to a murder, then not go to jail. It's just not how it works. The deal is going to get thrown out. Police aren't going to make a deal like that. So why is he asking for it if Steve did it? I want you to think about that. Lisa says, Steve Pankey episode was one of my favorites. He is fascinating. He did such a great interview. Thank you, Lisa. I now move down to this. Angela came across, and we may run long in the show tonight, just by the way. I don't think I'm going to get to those other things. Now you know why I wanted to start this when I did. Angela came across some notes in their house about the raked snow comet, the thing that's been made the big deal. How did Steve know that? That was protected material. It wasn't protected material. They portrayed that in the episode. That is not true. The neighbors knew it. Norris Drake's family knew it. The next door neighbors knew it. Everybody knew it. On top of the fact that it's the cops here in the 21st century who admitted that the initial investigation was a mess. So why believe anything those cops said back then about how there was protected information? Do you see what I'm saying here? It's confirmation bias. They're just hearing and thinking what they want. This is not true. It was not. That may be what the cops say now from 1985, but it's not true. Moreover, if Steve killed Jonelle and raked those snow, would he really write it down for someone to find, like his wife, who he knows hated him? I want you to think about that. Mary says, this is crazy stuff. I think, yeah, it is crazy stuff. I'm going to ask you, all of you are true crime enthusiasts. Does Steve's behavior, writing something like that down, does that not sound more like somebody who's trying to figure out what actually did happen and not like somebody who did it? Because if that's the standard, people writing stuff down like that, I guess I'm responsible for all 340. I did it. I committed all of the disappearances that have ever been featured on Unfound. I am the suspect. If that's the standard. Something to think about. And by the way, Angela found this stuff. She sent it to the police. I get it. I think she did the right thing. Even so, I'll say that. She did the right thing. You've come across something like that. You're like, you know what? I got to turn this in. I agree. Now, as far as what this thing was about her saying, she said, well, we can't represent you because we represent people who are suing Steve. I don't know anything about that. I did ask Steve about that in the letter. So now we get to 2014. Steve runs for governor and all of that. Detective Cash tells Angela that they can't find this original report that she sent to them. You know, nobody knows what happens to that. Yeah, probably because the cops back then lost it because the investigation was a mess. But Prill and Cash relied on the original investigation for the case they built against Steve. You can't have it both ways. You can't say the original investigation was bad, then use that information against Steve. But that's what they did. And this is the police department we are believing for this. He's a complete narcissist and pathological liar. You know, Kathy, I think there's a lot of lying going on. And I saw a lot of lying going on in that production last night by a lot of people, at least the way I understand things. Mary says, I think he made himself look guilty, kind of, but not even that much. And they wanted a scapegoat. Could be. And I'm going to say it again. Cash says that was privileged info. It was not. The neighbors knew about it. Everybody on that street knew about it. So it's at least conceivable then that Steve found out about it. It was not privileged. It was not protected. And once again, it was Detective Cash himself who said the initial investigation was a mess. So why believe anything those cops said back then? They're the ones claiming it was privileged. Why believe them if you believe the investigation was a mess? You know, you can't have it both ways. And then they go over eventually how Jonelle was found. Talks about the gunshot wound found by accident. Of course, Cash and Prill go back to talk to Steve Pankey. He jokes around with him about reading the rights. Steve laughed while saying it. And it was back then after they left, and this is our guy. That's when they decided this is our guy, because Steve once again acted in a weird way. They got a search warrant, no TVs, no radios. There were actually 2 pianos in Steve's place. That's weird. As a piano player myself, that was weird. I didn't ask him about that. Now here's something else that I want you all to think about. And like I said, probably going to run over, and I do have, maybe I'll do that right now. I'm going to take a break from this and answer Stephanie's question, because she was so kind to get this question in before we started. It has nothing to do with Steve's disappearance, but we're getting to like a really good part of the production. But I want to answer this question because it's really good. Stephanie sent me this question. It's very long. Stephanie asks, sometimes I hear police departments say that they receive too many tips in a case, and as a result, some slip through the cracks. They were lost in the shovel, etc. To me, this seems to imply that unless a person knows something without a shadow of a doubt that the info they have is related to a case, they're just overwhelming the police department by calling it in. However, I also have often seen police departments say that if a person feels they have info that could be related to a case, no matter how small, no matter if it seems insignificant, it should be called in. Considering all of this, in your opinion, Ed, how is a person to determine whether information that they suspect could be related to a disappearance is something that should be reported? Do you feel that we were overwhelmed by tips and some of them slipped through the tracks, quote unquote, is mainly an excuse given after the fact in a shoddy investigation by departments that didn't do a thorough job or were too proud to ask for help when they needed it? Or is there actually some sort of tip reporting etiquette? I love how she puts that, tip recording etiquette, which, if it isn't followed, runs the risk of overwhelming investigators or police to the point that they can't effectively navigate a situation. Just curious to hear your view on this as someone who has looked into so many disappearances. There's 3 parts to this, Stephanie. 3 parts that I have written down. First, when it comes to too many tips, all right, they say too many tips. My experience is the only way that happens is when some crazy reward is put out there. I am not under the impression that police normally get a lot of tips on disappearances. In fact, as you've heard so often on Unfound, it's no information. Nobody has anything to say. Nobody knows anything. Or if somebody says something, they're not saying anything. So when we talk about too many tips, this, in my experience, only happens when rewards are often, and you know how I feel about that. Don't do rewards. This is stupid. Why? It's not because of too many tips. It's because the tips that you get, the only reason the people are turning in is hoping they'll get lucky. All right. So we have to remember, when it comes to the idea of when police say too many tips, this is rare. It's not indicative of disappearance investigations as a whole. And that it usually happens because a family or a police department, whoever, feels motivated to offer up a reward, and then suddenly they get a flood from, everybody, including psychics and everybody else. Then it becomes too many. But that normally, too many tips is rare. Usually they got no tips. They got nothing to go on. Now, the second part of this is, and as Sarah says, many of the tips are not credible. Certainly true. I'm going to get to that. Mary says, but it's so much more complicated than I even know. I'm more listening and learning more than I knew. Is this what's in the documentary? Yes, it's in there, Mary. I'm just going by it. I hope you'll catch it on Oxygen. But getting back to this question, point number 2 from Stephanie's question. When they say overwhelmed, they certainly don't mean normally that they're overwhelmed by the information. They're, in my opinion, because like I said, I don't believe that they get so many tips that they're overwhelmed. It's exactly the opposite. But I do believe that they're overwhelmed, but they're not going to admit why. The reason they're overwhelmed is because they don't know what they're doing. They have no experience in this area. They really don't know what they're looking for. And that's one of those things going back. Well, if they're getting a lot of tips, I would be, and many of you, I'm not unique in this, being that you listen to Unfound. And if you've listened to at least 100 episodes, you are more than skilled enough to be able to go through tips, a lot of tips, and know a disappearance, go through those tips and be able to weed out the decent ones from the crap ones. And I'm going to guess that most of them are crap, but you would be a much better judge of those tips than anybody in law enforcement would be. So when they say overwhelmed, it's very possible that they're lying and saying, we just got so many tips, they're overwhelmed. When really they're overwhelmed because they don't know what to do. As I've stated, you get past about a week in a disappearance. If the person doesn't show up alive or dead, most police departments don't know what to do. But they're not going to admit that. They're not going to admit that. All right. So that's part of it as well regarding all of this. This is a fantastic question. I've never had this asked of me before. Stephanie, it's a fantastic question. Good work on that. Now, point number 3. The problem police have when it comes to getting good tips on disappearances is they want to take, and they don't want to give. Investigations are like anything else. To get something, you have to give something. The problem we have is that the police, people aren't mind readers. I got into this with when I appeared on the consult last week. What did I talk about? The media does a horrible reporting on disappearances because they don't give the public any real facts to chew on, to think about. Go back and listen to that. This is the same way. The police just want to ask, and they just expect people to show up. People aren't mind readers. But the thing is, the police aren't going to tell you like where that person was headed and who that person was with and what they were supposed to be doing. And the last person that, people are just supposed to show up and like read these people's minds. They're just supposed to know stuff. They don't want to give anything. So it's no wonder they don't get anything in return. And what they do get is crap. And they don't know how to decipher it. They only give out, I have the example of the DC shooters from like 20 years ago. It happened when I worked at Star Trek. That's a good example in that. They only started giving out good information when the police start to look bad. That's the only time police will start giving out information, when they think they are losing the PR war on any investigation. Whether it has to do with a serial killer, disappearance, anything else. If you've watched any documentaries on the DC shooters, you see they wanted to cover up the idea that there was they wanted to portray these things as random occurrences. No need to worry. This is just chance. And it wasn't. And it wasn't till it kept happening that they realized, well, we can't keep saying that anymore, that they changed their tune. They didn't want to give. They didn't want to give information. So what did they get? They got a lot of bad information. And they deserve it. It's horrible. It's horrible that people have to die and go missing because of all of this. But this is the way it is. So when you ask me about tips and everything else, what's the proper tip etiquette? The public is never going to have proper tip etiquette as long as the police and the media in conjunction with them only want to write 2 sentences about a disappearance. There will never be any good tip etiquette as long as that's the situation. It will always then end up coming down to psychics and numerologists and palm readers and people like that, and people looking to get lucky, and meth heads who just hoping they're right so they can get the reward. That's what it's limited to. So, there is no proper tip etiquette. Because you can't have proper tip etiquette if you don't know the relevant information. And I know what they say, we got to protect the investigation. There is no reason that people like where that person was headed, who they were with, what kind of car they were in, who was the last person to see them, things like that. You look at disappearance stories that when they originally come out, none of that stuff's in there. And they wonder why they don't get any tips. I mean, some of the things like I post missing persons news, as you know, just about every day in the discussion group on the Facebook page. A lot of times they don't even want to name the city. It's just a county, Smith County. Well, we know how big counties are in the United States. Well, John Smith vanished from Brown County on July 4th, 2024. If anybody sees him, let us know. Well, where in Brown County? Was he walking? Was he driving? Was he with somebody? Who last saw him? Was it in the middle of the night? Did he have any mental problems? Did he have drug issues? Was somebody after him? On and on, nothing. And they know that information. They all know that information and post none of it. So if they don't get any tips, that's on them. And this is why I've told families, of course, when I get to them, it's already been a year or however long. At least I've talked about it here in other places. Don't listen to the police. They're going to tell you, well, you got to hold back. You got to allow us to do our job. Do not listen to them. Do not listen to them. Your loved one goes missing, you blast everything. As long as it's the truth. No lying. No lying. But you blast all the truth. Doesn't matter what the police say. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they're doing. They're not on your team. Yes, they want the disappearance solved. They want to do it their way. But they don't know what they're doing. So, Stephanie, thank you. You're a very spectacular question. Spectacular. Very, very nice. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer that tonight. All right, back to Steve Pankey. And like I said, I'm not going to get to these other stories tonight. This is going to be the only thing. All right, I got to go back up. So now we're at April. We're at the point where they've now determined they've gotten the warrants. They've gone in. They've gone to Pankey's place. Now, what caught my eye and ear? I want you all to think about this. Of course, we already know that at some point way in the past, he'd written down the thing about the snow and the footprints being covered up, with the raking. We all know about that. They were able to seize Steve's computers. They saw everything that he had searched, every website that he went to, checking his history, the Google searches, everything else. And they said he did searches for Jonelle thousands and thousands of times. You know what? Detective Pro and Detective Cash. I've done thousands of searches for Jonelle Matthews too. I didn't kill her. I bet many thousands and thousands of people over the years have done thousands and thousands of searches for Jonelle Matthews too. Guess what? None of those people probably killed Jonelle either. But what is most important to me, what catches my eye, is that what they didn't find. It's like that Sherlock Holmes story, the dog that didn't bark. Steve's computer didn't bark. You know what they did not find? They did not find anything about how he researched how he could get away with murder. They didn't find anything on there, no searches about how he could avoid prosecution, how he might claim insanity if he did kill Jonelle. No plans to go to another country, no travel plans, nothing. Even though at that point, he knew that they were looking into him for Jonelle's murder. He never did one search regarding anything that would make him look guilty. Even though there's no way he could know whether they were going to come and get his computers or not. But they had already come and talked to him twice. I want you to think about that. Nothing. Of course, we've heard all the stories. These guys get caught poisoning their wives. What do they find on the guys' computers? Looking up, poison, how to, make it look like an overdose. They're so stupid. I mean, how many people have gotten caught like that? Thousands. Steve Pankey, not one thing on his phone or computers about how to get away with murder or, if he was going to be charged with anything, how he could get out of these charges. Nothing. Nothing to show he murdered Jonelle. Nothing about if DNA can be used after 40 years. Nothing showing that he knew anything about the crime except what was public. Nothing shown he knew anything about the murder more than anyone else. You know how I know that? Because if it was anything else, they would have been in the show and it would have been in the trials, and it wasn't, because that was legally obtained material. Nothing showing that Steve had any more knowledge about the crimes than anybody else, despite what they said about the footprints. Okay. The traffic stop. At one point, DA Rourke says in there, why is he doing this? It's obvious to me they don't understand Steve Pankey. It's obvious to me they don't understand him. And like I said, we got 4 minutes. This is going to be an unusually live show. I hope everybody can hang in there with me. Still got a little ways to go. But when DA Rourke says in the show, why is he doing this? Acting the way Steve does, if he's not guilty, they don't understand Steve Pankey. He displayed this kind of material, this kind of behavior in his life well before Jonelle ever went missing. His behavior and how he has acted since 1985 has nothing to do with her murder. He acted like this beforehand. I know, because that's what Angela said. So then I appear, and they asked me about Steve Pankey. And one of the first comments they have me saying is about how I've run into a lot of Steve Pankeys. I do. And I'll give you some examples. No, I'm not. He, of course, had nothing to do with her disappearance. But has anybody ever heard of James Renner regarding Maura Murray and all the crazy stories he has and the things that he's done over the last 15 years? How about James Renner in relation to the disappearance of Maura Murray? I think James Renner is a kook. A lot of people don't. How about people thinking that to this day, people think that there are some people to this day. Now you tell them about kooky. There's some people today who still think that Brian Schaefer is in a wall at the Ugly Tuna. Now that's surely kookier than anything Steve Pankey ever did. How about the people that think that Israel Keys killed Suzanne Lyle? No proof of that. No proof he was in the area. Nothing. But they believe it. How about people hearing another voice on Brandon Lawson's 911 call? We now know that didn't happen. He was found on somebody else's property. I know it still doesn't come in. But we now know that there was not another person there, but they're there. But we still know people to this day still insist there was. Surely kookier than anything Steve Pankey has done. There's still people that think that 9/11, that the planes didn't bring down the towers, that there were engineering crews who went into the World Trade Center, set up explosive charges, the planes hit the buildings, and then the explosive charges were set off. There are people in 2024 who believe this. That is surely kookier than anything that Steve Pankey has ever done. But they think Steve Pankey's a kook. It's all relative. And this is what I meant when I say I know a lot of Steve Pankies, people with crazy ideas saying crazy things. This is what I meant. Ed, you're really explaining stuff well. Thank you. It's making me mad. I'm glad. People should be mad. Thank you, Amy. I thought that was not fully solved, though. Which one are you talking about? Cranky 99 of those examples. So that when you hear that, that's what's in my head. When you hear me say, I know a lot of Steve Pankies and have dealt with them. That was in what was in my head when I said it. I also appreciate that they put my weird cat topic. Brandon Lawson, I realized that the remains on that piece of property, I get it. He wasn't murdered, Cranky. I realize it's not totally resolved, but they found the remains right down there on that piece of property. If it's not him, I'll own up to it. All right. And I'll say I was wrong, but it's Brandon Lawson. The arrest of Steve. I'm going to reiterate, it still amazes me that the Matthews never heard of Steve. Police, not once. Not Detective Prill, not Detective Cash, not Blaskowitz, not the guy that worked for the DA's office in the late 80s. Not one of them ever went to the Matthews and said, we got this guy, Steve Panky. Kind of a weird cat, kind of saying things. Have you ever heard of him? Not once. They had never heard of him until August of 2019. That is incredible. They made a big deal about Steve saying that, he said that Jonelle was dead. What is anybody supposed to think when a child goes missing and gets abducted from a home? It's not an unusual thought. They portrayed that Steve had inside information. I hope every person that we featured on Unfound is alive. I know most of them aren't. Does that make me then the killer of, being that I suspect that they're dead? Does that make me the killer of them? Okay. And then, of course, I came back on and I made my point, and I appreciate I once again appreciate the production of doing this, that they did include that I made my point. They never put him on that street. Could never prove he knew the Matthews. Nothing. And I appreciate, if you're listening out there, production crew over there in England, thank you for putting that in there. I appreciate it. They brought up the book that Steve was writing that had a lot of similarities and things going on in his life. They made a big deal out of it. You know what? You know who else wrote about his life and people he knew? Ian Fleming, the guy that created James Bond. James Bond was based on a real person and Ian Fleming's own experiences during World War II. Here's what I know. Ian Fleming was not a super spy. Doesn't mean anything. They brought up the name of the woman that Steve originally allegedly raped back in the 1970s. I'll come back to that. Talk about how he got excommunicated from the Nazarene church when that got out. Really ticked Steve off. Here's, once again, like I said, I think the Russ Ross part of this entire production was the most controversial part to me. As far as my understanding, me talking to him and what was presented, I guess, in court and also on this show. D.A. Rourke and this assistant of his, I think it was Rourke, said that they had proof that Steve followed Russ Ross around. I specifically asked Russ Ross this question in October of 2019. He said no. I said, over the years, did you ever suspect that Russ Ross or that Steve Panky was following you around? He said no. In the show, they said the opposite. So I realized that I didn't have Russ Ross under oath like these guys would have. Am I then to understand that Russ Ross changed his story? I asked, because once again, I've entertained the idea. Was Steve following Russ around? He told me no. So I don't know if he told me the truth in 2019. I don't know then how you go about proving that Steve was following Russ Ross around in the 1980s without Russ Ross knowing himself that Steve was doing it. I don't know how you do that. There's no video that you can go back to or anything, but that's what they said. Russ Ross told me, nope. In fact, Russ Ross said, as I'll say here, Russ Ross told me he never thought Steve was following him. Russ Ross never suspected Panky in Jonelle's disappearance. Russ was not Steve's boss. I've already gone over that. Russ told me he was not part of the lawsuit, even though they portrayed it in the show that he was. Russ Ross in 2019 told me he'd even forgotten about that lawsuit. So somebody is lying somewhere, and it's not me. I'll go through it again. In this section in part 2, they talked about Russ Ross. They said there was some proof that Steve had been following Russ Ross around. I asked Russ Ross this. He said no. He never suspected Russ. He said just no. No. But somehow the DA in the show says they did find proof. Was that presented? Do we know how they found that out? Or has Russ Ross then changed his story so as to go along with a particular storyline that was convenient for the prosecution? I wonder. Russ Ross never suspected Panky and Jonelle's disappearance. That's what he told me. Russ Ross was not Steve's boss. So Ross said they were in different departments. Russ Ross told me he was not part of the lawsuit. Russ Ross had even forgotten about the lawsuit when I brought it up with him in October of 2019. What I also saw in this section was a kind of shifting of motivations. It's obvious to me that to this day, the prosecution does not have a firm grasp on Steve Panky and his murder of Jonelle. Why do I say that? First of all, as you will see, they make it out that Steve allegedly raped Deb Moon. Her name is mentioned in the show, so it's no big deal. And he was charged with something, never spent a day in jail or anything. But he was upset. And they say first that he killed Jonelle because of the rape back in 1977. But then they change it and they say, no, wait a minute. He killed Jonelle because he got excommunicated from the Nazarene church. Oh, no, wait a minute. He did it because he was still mad at Russ Ross and he was following him around and he wanted to get back at Russ Ross by murdering Jonelle, who Russ Ross dropped off that night. You watch it for yourself and you tell me if I'm wrong. Now, do you see? I know, and I appreciate a lot of you disagree with me on this. I'm telling you why this is what goes on in my head regarding all of this. And I'll reiterate again. No gun, no fingerprints, no forensics. No proof that he even knew Jonelle Matthews existed. Of course, the Matthews family didn't know him. They admitted it. Didn't live. He lived 3 miles away, as Angela Hicks stated. They lived 3 miles out of Greeley, nowhere near where the Matthews lived. So the prosecution, in my mind, to this day, So Steve, so their idea is that Steve was following Russ Ross around, saw Jonelle get out of the car, and kidnapped her and killed her. And so my question is, and within all of this, the garage door just happened to be open to make Steve's crime easier. He didn't have to go and knock on the door. He could just walk in the garage, go in the door. Or what? Did he open the garage door too, knowing that Russ Ross was going to drop Jonelle Matthews off there and somehow knew Jonelle would be home by himself? Do you see how complicated this all gets? By the way, prosecution stayed away from all of this in both trials. By the way, I have a question. I want to know why the police, it never came up in either, and I've never heard this. Why don't the police suspect that the killer was already inside when Jonelle got home? The garage door was up. The Matthews family admits we don't do that. Why can't we suspect the killer wasn't just already inside when Jonelle got home? And those footprints that were around the house were made beforehand, before Jonelle got home. And the garage door's up. Does that, if we want to go to the common sense for this, does that not seem more logical than Russ Ross or Steve following Russ Ross around and Jonelle getting dropped off and she just happens to be home and Steve happens to abduct her and the garage door happens to be up, but it has nothing to do with the murder? Keep in mind what we know about disappearances. The simplest example is usually the right one. Remember that. You know, and I already talked about the footprints. Let me see, second trial. I've convinced myself of this. Mary says the Panky connection has never sat right with me. It still doesn't, but Steve got locked up. Les, it was such an interesting show. Ed, Steve Panky is an interesting character, to say the least. Noted President Reagan said in the show, 100,000 kids went missing every year back then. So many then too. Yeah, the difference is we just 99,900 of them usually come back within a few days. Just so you know. But, you know, I'm not going to call President Reagan a liar. I just have to put some context to it. Cranky, I'm curious to know what the statistics are with cases where the detective retires, the length of time it takes for the new detective to restart the case, and the probability of being solved. That would be a pretty hard study there, but might be interesting. So the show of death, meaning Panky looked more guilty than he was proven to be, whatever the case may be. You can judge that for yourself, Mary. I'm just picking out what I noticed. Was Steve charged with the earlier rape? He was. The charges were dropped. He never spent a day in jail, never paid a fine. Mary, I will watch for sure. You're giving me so much to think about. There shouldn't be all these questions still. If you want my opinion on why the second jury convicted Steve Panky, there was a big difference between the first and second trial. In the second trial, Deb Moon was allowed to testify. She was not allowed in the first. She was the woman who Steve allegedly raped back in 1977. In my opinion, because there's surely no proof that Steve killed Jonelle. Nothing. I've been over that over and over and over. I believe Steve got convicted because the jury thought Steve raped Deb Moon and got away with it back in 1977. It's now fairly clear to me that the reason she went in there, she claimed that he raped her, he didn't go to jail and everything else. I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure. Because otherwise, the prosecution's case is, you know what the prosecution case otherwise is? Steve killed Jonelle because he was mad at his former church. That's essentially the prosecution's story. He murdered Jonelle because he was pissed off of getting kicked out of a church, and so he took it on a girl. And that was enough. It seems pretty thin to me. That's the way the show presents it. He had all this anger about getting it kicked out of the church, and so that's why he did it. And they also something that was this is a big deal, and so I asked Steve about it in the letter today that I sent him. They also made a big deal about how Steve, something once again going back to what Angela found, and I believe she found it legally, no allegations there, this is real, that Steve had written somewhere the 2 cops live on Jonelle Street. Now remember, this wasn't found until like the 1990s or something. And so they're saying, so of course the prosecution, the police are thinking, oh, look at that. So he did know this. First of all, we don't know when that was written. All we know is when it was found. We don't know when it was written. In addition, Steve could have found out a multitude of ways where police in Greeley lived. He could have just asked somebody. He could have looked in the phone book. He could have gone down to headquarters. He could have done this. He might have known somebody who knew a cop who, just comes up in conversation. There are a million different ways he could have found out that 2 police officers lived on the same street where Jonelle did. Especially since this note wasn't found until the 1990s. He would have had 10 years to do that. Doesn't mean anything. And in fact, knowing Steve's attitude toward the police, we could look at it another way. Could it be that he suspected police officers in the murder of Jonelle, and so he went about finding out how close police officers lived to her house? Is that not possible? Given Steve's well-known attitude toward police going back to the 1970s, that everybody acknowledges, even his own ex-wife, hates the police, suspicious of the police. Does it not make a lot of sense that Jonelle goes missing? Steve takes an interest because he already has a hatred for the police for whatever reason, thinks maybe the police did it. And so he starts looking to, do any police live near her? Because otherwise, there's no reason for him to write that down. If he murdered Jonelle, what does it matter if 1 or 100 cops live on her street? What does it matter? It doesn't matter at all. But this is one of those things when you first see it, it's like, oh. But then when you really start to think about Steve and about everything, it's not that suspicious. Moreover, of course, once Jonelle went missing, it was well known where she lived. I will tell you. I mean, the way they're reasoning things out, I'm in trouble if police ever find out that I know where a bunch of people live because of databases that I have. The databases I have, I can find where any famous person lives, some mansion in Bel Air or whatever else. I can find out where former Playboy models live. I've done that maybe a couple times, not to show my private life too much, because I have to admit, I do it to test myself. Because a lot of these people, they don't want to be found. They're very private people. I have databases. You can find any person in the United States. That doesn't make me a killer. It doesn't make me a stalker. This is the business that I do, so I test myself. It doesn't mean anything. There's no proof he was conducting surveillance. He could have found out where police lived a multitude of ways. And I want to just read this to you, and we're almost done here. We have to keep in mind, no fingerprints, no gun, no proof he knew the victim, no proof he was on that street. Nobody saw anything on that street. Nobody heard anything except the dog was barking. No proof those prints in the snow were his. No proof Steve was following Russ Ross around. No proof Steve was ever followed anyone anywhere. No proof he ever searched anything on his computer about how to get away with murder, even after he knew police were taking an interest in him. Even though he did continue to do searches on Jonelle Matthews after they were there. But there is plenty of proof that something is not right with Steve Pankey mentally. There's plenty of proof that Angela Hicks hates him. What woman wouldn't? Plenty of proof of a lot, but no proof Steve killed Jonelle. And in that production, not one mention of Norris Drake. Even though Keith Olson, who I'm going to call tomorrow, from the DA's office, talked to Norris Drake in 1989 and actually thought Norris Drake was the one who took Jonelle. Couple more things I talked about. I can talk about it now. Me and the director of the series. This was not reflected in the show, and I appreciate that. But about the last 10 to 15 minutes of my interaction, it was a little challenging. He challenged me. Being that Steve says I'm a master manipulator and all these things. The guy asked me, are you sure? Because me expressing my doubts. He says, are you sure that you're not the one who's being manipulated by Steve? And I don't specifically remember what I said is, I'm just asking him questions. I was already writing letters to Steve at this point. I'm just still searching for the truth because it's obvious to me that none of this was proven. I'm still searching for the truth. Was I sure that I wasn't being manipulated by Steve without realizing it? But the point I made to him, which was, of course, it was recorded, but didn't make it into the show, is what I told the guy. And of course, he was British. I guess that might add something to do with it. I forget exactly how I put it, but I told him, we don't convict people like this in the United States, is what I told him. It also came up about Angela. He asked me about Angela. And, of course, she's portrayed as a battered wife. I can't imagine living with Steve Pankey. All right. Cannot imagine it. But just because he's crazy and a bad husband and everything else doesn't make him a killer. My point was that, because he said, don't you understand, Angela? And because we got into this discussion about how I said, once again, it's not in the show, but I can talk about it now. I wasn't allowed to talk about this until the show came out. That, it came out. I made the point, here she was saying all these things about Steve, how bad he was and everything else. But, she still had she was bad on everything else. She stayed with him. She had a kid. And the director's point was, that she was afraid to leave. She was a battered wife. And I said, yeah, but she did leave and she's still alive. So was that real fear or was that just in her mind? Now, I've learned a lot about battered wives over the last 8 years. Certainly. Some of the guests have been battered wives. We've talked about battered wives in the think tank. And what I've heard over and over and over is that women need to leave. This isn't me talking. These are battered women talking. So that Angela didn't until 1999, 15 years after Jonelle went missing, and she's still alive. And I'm happy about that. And the director said he threatened her and said, all I care about is her credibility on the stand. That's all I care about. And we should never judge anyone by what our exes say about us. I even bring this up. You've heard me do it. An ex-wife, ex-husband or something. What do I say? We just have to remember this is an ex. They say stuff. All I care about is Angela's credibility on the stand, and we should never judge anyone by what our exes say about us. That's what I said. And so he and myself and the director got into a little tiff over that. And then what the final sticking point was, I would say within the last 5 minutes. He asked me, and I even made, we got into this discussion, and it had something to do with it. Nina Mills, her body was found, 30 miles outside of Greeley, or was it 30 minutes? 30 miles outside of Greeley, Colorado by accident, Nina. And the director, I would say he's kind of set me up. I think he knew he was going to do this. And I said, I've looked into, what are we talking about? I don't remember how we got on the topic. But at some point, I said that I looked into something, which I had. And then he brought up the two women's names, a 14-year-old Elizabeth Miller, who went missing in Idaho Springs, Colorado on August 16th of 1983. She is still missing. And then he also brought up the name Denise Davenport, who was a University of Northern Colorado in Greeley. She was reported missing. She was later found murdered. And he asked me if I had ever heard of those two names. My guess is I had run across them at some point when I was looking into Greeley, Colorado, and Steve and everything, but I did not remember the names. And when I said, he asked me about these two names, and I said, no, I don't remember who they are. He goes, oh, you looked them up. You say you looked them up. Well, you should look them up. And it would kind of implied that maybe I was lying, that if I looked anything up or something like that, I'm not doing my job right. Pissed me off. And so what did I do? I went back to the hotel and looked them up. And then I was like, oh yeah, now I remember. But in the moment, he was kind of, it didn't end up in the final cut. I'm happy about that. But, given that I took a very contrary position, I couldn't help but think that he was trying to undermine, my thinking or something by doing that. But once again, it is not shown in the final cut of the show. And I'm, of course, very happy about that. But the guy ticked me off. And that's why when we finally went out to the car and I was being driven back to the hotel, I was with the guy who I've gotten to know very well. I said to him, well, I guess you found your villain for this production. And I'm happy in the final cut. I am the only person with a contrary position, but of course I'm not portrayed as a villain. And I want to, again, thank them all for that. So that is my assessment of the show. Now that this is all recorded, you can watch it and you can go back and, I guess, listen or watch this and see how it all lines up with what, your own impressions. Mary, see, I've always thought, so what the heck proof do they have? And I always thought maybe I was missing something. I might be, but they're missing a lot of something too. Where was her body found? Once again, far outside of Greeley, Nina, in a field. I don't even know who owned that piece of property back then. So one more thing, and my voice is feeling a lot. Maybe I just needed to loosen my voice up today. This Friday, that ends my insight into the show that came out, The Girl in the Milk Carton, my experience with it. I sent Steve a bunch of questions. I'm sure he'll write back to me. I cannot guarantee he will answer those questions. If he does, I will go over them with you. But this Friday, update episode number 18. And I was very much correct. There are only 20 updates. Usually there are around 30. So, Leanne asked, was it ever said what caliber gun she was murdered with? It was. I forget what it was, Leanne. All I know is during neither trial, even though they said Steve had a bunch of guns, they never stated that he owned a gun in that caliber or ever did own a gun in that caliber. I think it was a .38 caliber. I think. But they could never prove that Steve ever owned a gun of that caliber. 38, fairly common, so it makes sense if he has 14 guns, one of them would be. But it was never brought up at trial. Was it ever? Yeah, keep talking about this Panky guy. I guess I should research this one. Please do, Cranky. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me or message me or something. Love to hear more your thoughts on it. But this Friday, update episode number 18, only 20 updates combined between podcast episodes and Unfound Nows. Like I said, my perception is it was a slow summer. I was right, unfortunately. Maybe it'll pick up this fall and some of these cases will get solved and resolved. But that will be this Friday. I've already recorded part of it. Hopefully my voice will feel a little better tomorrow. But man, I'm feeling good about my voice right now. I guess all it needed to do is be loosened up a little bit, a little stretching. Certainly better than when I started. You watch tomorrow, I won't be able to talk at all. You just watch. But that's all I have for tonight. This is a record long one, but I had to get through all this 2.5 hours. Thank you all for hanging in there. Please give this a thumbs up, share it, like it, subscribe, join, and you'll hear nothing but my voice this Friday for update episode number 18. Charlie, say hi to the kids for me. Shuri, great to see you in the chat tonight. Good night.